It is hard to speak after the last spoken word was by Rahul Bose. And here I have titans from the industry. I can't help but feel a tad bit underachiever. But really, good morning and welcome to this session. And as you know, the topic for this session is Accelerate Business Transformation Strategies for the Workforce. So the world of work has dramatically changed over the last couple of years, and technologies continue to evolve. Decision makers must act proactively to design work, worker, and the workplace. Talent is at the heart of this tall task, adopting radical technologies to transform businesses and, by extension, the operating ecosystem. It is time for leaders to leap with agility, to develop a digital workplace and a digital ecosystem and turbocharge talent potential, productivity, fueling innovation and competitive advantage. To that point, I'd want to take an opening statement from the panelists. Businesses across industries are getting impacted by increasing competition on account of globalization, new entrants in the market with agile business models. Additionally, new emerging technologies are disrupting business operations at multiple levels. It would be interesting to learn from you all about some of the major business disruptors and how they are leading to innovation and growth. We'll start with you, Jay.
So from an opening remarks perspective, we see certain interesting trends which businesses are impacted by. I would say the most important disruption which happened several years back, few decades back, was the internet, right? So the internet was really the first true disruptor in terms of reducing the ability to, or removing the barriers to collaboration, communication, and all the other related benefits, right? And going forward, we believe that cloud computing, technologies like quantum computing, of course, AI/ML is something which we are all dealing with on a regular basis. These technologies have the potential to bring about drastic change. But most importantly, what we are seeing from a future of work and collaboration perspective, the experiences are becoming more and more immersive. So we have this entire conundrum of space versus the more far away you are, the more diffused the collaboration becomes. But that space-time, space-related complexities are getting drastically reduced now with things like metaverse coming in. We are in for interesting times, interesting developments we are expecting in both future of work and the way technology is disrupting.
So, my take is there are some massive problems, stroke opportunities out there in the market. And we keep talking in the context of our business, but there are rising sea levels, and that's an issue, right? There is a conversation around modern medicine becoming irrelevant. That's an issue. Aging population, that's an issue. There is, editing gene codes, genes is an issue. So there is so much out there which seems out of context for us running various roles, not realizing that each one of these, if solved, will dramatically change multiple industries. And we don't see that coming. And then once it happens, we say, boom, there is a lot of disruption, the pace of change has increased. So there is a whole layer of emerging technology which hopefully brings in that disruption and change. But the point I want to make once again is, it takes tens of years after the phone was invented for an app store to come. The entertainment industry, the telecom industry didn't see it for those 10 years. And now we say, boom, the world has changed. So I think we've got to keep our antennas up and try and connect the dots of things that don't intuitively in the short term seem relevant and create that as an opportunity to disrupt our own business model. So really, what is the biggest disruption? Today, disruption is the biggest disruption. And the good news is, small companies with limited resources today have the power to disrupt large giants. And we've got to learn more and more from them. Thank you.
TK.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Pooja, thank you, ETHR. Thank you, Dallas, for having me over. Indeed, I had the pleasure of listening to Rahul Bose, and it was indeed a very inspiring session. Coming to the question, Pooja, I think the word of disruption, I think, has been used in the world for many, many years. And I don't think it's new. It's just that, in fact, if you ask me 10 years back, we spoke about disruption. 5 years back, we spoke about disruption. Today, we are still speaking about disruption. So I guess disruption is not new, and it's been happening around the world for many years. But I guess what we are seeing now is probably the rate of it is much faster, is much quicker. And hence, our ability to respond also has to be that much faster. The pandemic, I think, has been a significant, I would say, eye-opener for all of us around the world, be it corporations, be it individuals, or be it nations. None of us, when we, one of the challenges, and this is my view, and I'm sure, at some stage we should have a larger discussion on that, is that the confidence of the certainty with which we predict the future is very worrying. I guess that is something that certainly is come under question. None of us would have predicted the pandemic in 2019 or 2020, or 2018 or 2019. But what it did to the world, and in fact, most corporations, large corporations, would have a very structured business continuity plan, where we try and envisage all possible scenarios, which could happen, and how do you really continue the business. And you often simulate situations where one part of the country is shut down, or one data center is shut down, or or probably one geography is shut down, so you can move operations to some other geography. But I don't think any BCP plan in the world envisaged a situation where every location in the world, every business plan in the world would all get disrupted at the same time concurrently. And the best part of the disruption was the poorest of nations to the richest of nations, I think, were as clueless to manage the situation. So I would say the biggest, learning that we have, and for example, I'll give you, the whole sharing of moments that was happening, the ETHR WhatsApp group yesterday, was such a phenomenal thing. But imagine, many years back, when until Kodak, invented the film photography, it was a very skilled art, right? An artist only could capture a moment. And today, it is in the hands of everyone, and we could capture moments on a camera and share it. But look at Kodak as a corporation, which in a way was someone who transformed the whole business of photography and films. Until I think 1976, they had probably one of the largest number of patents. 1976, they created a digital platform for a phone, but didn't take it forward, right? Until and even now, I'm told that 2012, when they filed for bankruptcy, a lot of the patents have been bought by Samsung and Apple who are using it. The limited point is that for the disruptions that are happening today, I think the most important aspect which I would highlight is humility. I think the fact that you have to accept that none of us would know what will happen tomorrow and would be willing to learn and not walk into it assuming that I know it all. I think to me that would come really in the way of any corporation or individual really surviving this disruption. And the courage to make the change. When I say courage, the limited point is you should be humble enough to let go of what you believe was a success model of the past. Easier said than done. So my only highlight here would be that possibly the only shift that I see post-pandemic is that corporations, individuals, and nations have to be far more humble and have to accept the fact that we are in a process of learning, and that process is going to be ever-going process. And anyone, any corporation that has a flavor of I know it all, or this is how it shall be done, and this is how it will be done, I think run the risk of elimination. Thank you so much.
Dallas.
Hi, everyone. So, this 18th June, my wife turned 50. Incidentally, she's Shree's classmate, and it's not the crush story like last time, right? So, this was the lady only I had crush. He had no crush on her. So, and the way this worked was, I sent her a bunch of flowers in the morning, which is what you would do on a 50th birthday, first thing in the morning. And if I think about how I went through that entire process, it was completely digital, right? I went to Fernson Patel's, chose my specific bouquet, but the physical experiences couldn't be transformed, and the flower had to be delivered home. I had Nishant from Zoya call up my wife, which was already preset, and invited her to the studio, as they call it. And she had a set of choices which I knew what she liked, specific types of emerald and stuff like that. But a lot of that interaction, and before I went to the studio, Nishant had that interaction with my wife for about 5-6 hours, right? And then we landed into the studio before she chose what she wanted. The point that I wanted to make here is the context. The biggest disruptor actually is the consumer here, right? Across industries. The number one disruptor is the digitally aware and digitally needing customer. The customers are demanding a lot more digital services. They are more digitally aware. So fundamentally, that consumer is the one who's making and creating the shifts. So at the heart of the disruption is actually each one of you, which is you as a consumer. And underpinning is that what Jay mentioned, probably the context of when internet came in, or the context that Manpreet spoke about, how technologies and business models are getting infused with a lot more technology. And then, of course, Sri's point around companies realizing that you have the humility to accept that my old model will not work and you need it to change, right? So to me, those are interconnected to the digitally aware consumer, or the consumer who is the biggest disruptor. The second part that I wanted to link to that digital consumer is the context of transformation that companies are doing, which is leveraging technology, and whether it be it in your front office or in your back office. There is, be it automation, or be it experience, delivering experience, or be it managing your cost and efficiencies. There is an important element of technology that is getting in. But what that is doing is, it is changing the context of jobs. The content of our jobs that we do today is consistently changing. I'm sure each one of your jobs have changed drastically from the time probably when you started the career, right? The kind of tools that you use, to the kind of work that you do, the kind of analysis that you do, and the kind of decisions that you make are so different than what it is before. So the second part that I would want to typically was that there is a need for digital skilling, which has become embedded into every single job role, right? Now that leads to the point that we typically make is, how do you do it? How do you transform a workforce at scale to enable this, addressing this digitally transformed consumer? How do you're fundamentally as a business, you're trying to address that consumer. So how do you do that at scale, right? This rate of pace of change that we have today is probably the slowest. This is going to be faster and much more aggressive. The skill currency will become reduced. Jobs will continue to be redefined. There's some stats which say 60% of the content of every single job will change in the next 2 years. There's another one that said there are 30% of jobs that don't even exist today that will come up in the next 2 years' time. So anyway, so futurists will give us some perspective. But the point is, at the heart of this is the last aspect, which I say is where you said the humility to accept and to learn, right? So there is a wonderful line that I read in a book which said, the future of work is going to be learning. So learning will be at the heart of most work that we will do.
Thank you. That was really interesting. And I'd like to say that in the opening statement, we've taken half our time. So moving on, recent research reveals that workers' uneven digital skills affect economic mobility and business competitiveness, prompting action from policymakers to do something about it. So I'd like to ask Manpreet and Jay, given the accelerated pace of technology-oriented transformation, what are some of the best means to predict skills of tomorrow? I understand TK's philosophy that the pandemic has taught us one thing, never to predict. And predictions necessarily does not come true, but how do we predict the skills for future?
So there is this very, very interesting study by professors from University of Oxford. where they had mapped every single skill set in the world. In fact, I would encourage you to look it up. I forgot the title of the article. The article was written about 5-6 years back. Very, very popular and often quoted study, where what they did was they used a very rigorous scientific method to list down all important jobs in the world, right? Ranging from beautician, a technology programmer, various job levels, bank manager, teller, etc., etc. So they pretty much had around 300 plus job categories, and they did a detailed survey, and then they used advanced analytics techniques to map down these job descriptions, and they tried to predict which are the jobs most prone for disruption and automation. That's mildly saying which jobs are going to be redundant in the future, right? And this article has the detailed list of all the every single job title. And if you look at some of those jobs, like for example, the jobs which are most prone for disruption, which are without doubt were things like outbound call centers, for example, which are getting replaced by chatbots, etc. And then you have these technology, which are the programmers, the developers, which are also getting disrupted by more and more of automated coding and technology. The jobs which are least potential for disruption are yoga instructors, gym instructors, beauticians, etc. So we are in for interesting times because the level of automation we are seeing across the board is tremendous, and technology is, and you've all seen the numbers. I'm from the IT industry, so you all see numbers of the companies still growing at 20-25% year on year. But if you look at the commensurate increase in the number of people being recruited, it's about flat or slightly increasing, which essentially means there is more and more automation of all types of jobs coming in. We are in for very, very interesting times. Like Adul said, unless we are keeping ourselves updated and on new learning trajectories, we are in for some interesting times.
So, while I take the point that it's difficult to predict, we need to have humility, we need to look at the world around and have the agility to change. The ground reality is, I think a lot of us are very thanda, and I'm being very crude about it, because as I made a point in the last statement, things are happening around us for over a decade. ये metaverse का ढोल अब बिचना शुरू हुआ है. 1998 in Germany, there was the Second Life experience that I went through. And 10 years have gone by and suddenly the world is doing a rat race because now there is fear of missing out. So if we have, and again to the point, if we have the courage as a leadership, as a board, as a C-suite, to figure out what those big trends are. Now, how do you pick up trends, right? Let's pick up the large platform companies. Where is Microsoft investing money today, right? Why is it billions and trillions are being spent right now by Meta on Metaverse? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to another industry? Microsoft is spending billions of dollars on quantum computing. Can I have people here for different companies raise a hand and saying, yeah, we've got a play on what quantum computing will do for me and my customer? We are waiting. 5 साल बाद solve होगा, फिर उसके बाद हम देखेंगे हमारा क्या काम है. And then when we break this down to functions, HR की जिंदगी में तो बहुत बाद में आएगा. Business की, मतलब, everybody is going to get impacted with it, right? But we are not spending time enough to first figure out what those mega tectonic patterns are and what does that mean to my business and how is it that I can ready myself for it and start doing small experiments, frugal experiments. How can I fund a startup or a incubator to learn from that experience? The ecosystem is there, but we are not kind of predicting that. We don't have the courage, as somebody said, to be able to get there. It's okay when you're a large format company. I'm sorry, I'm being controversial, so don't put that out without a discussion. Being a mediocre. Because, being a mediocre, you're still retaining wealth until the chips are down. And the ground reality is, while we may be in the thick of a business model with all the cards out there, in a game of poker, you know it all, but you don't realize somebody is actually going to play chess when you have your cards in your hand. And that is going to be that young, frugal startup. So we've got to watch out for that. So simple answer, look at the large platform companies where the big billion-dollar investments are happening, which you find irrelevant. CRISPR technology, gene coding. If you're a pharma company, if you're a healthcare company, if you're a wellness company, think what that will do for us. If you are HR, think what ethics in gene coding is going to be. there's going to be billions and $1 trillion worth of businesses and skills that will get created. So that's the short.
Yeah. So Dallas, I'd like to get you here and ask you that how are the enterprise learning models shaping and reshaping to reskill the workforce in digital India?
Sure. So learning has always existed, right? And programmatic learning, it's something that's always been there. So I'll just link it to three probably evolutions that probably we have seen, and at least in the life of my company at Coursera over the last 10 years that we've been around. The first one is a framework where, the fundamental context was if there is programs, if there is learning, if there is content in any form, or a program, just put it out to people and let them choose what they want to learn, right? So that's the first phase that we saw. And then we would measure simple metrics, especially in some of the L&D leaders would know we were measuring simple metrics like how many hours per employee kind of metrics, right? So I call that the phase of open learning, which is, it doesn't matter how you delivered it, but we were trying to deliver that in a digital format, in an e-learning format. So that was the first phase that we saw. The outcome of that was you didn't have a lot of direct correlation to business outcomes. It was very activity driven. Kitne ghante pad liye, kitne logon ne kiye, kitne ne nahi kiye, and so on and so forth. The second one was where, as digital started coming in, companies started getting impacted by saying, here is a big skill gap, right? Tech services said, oh, you know what, my client-server people need to move to cloud, right? And the architectures are changing. So there was this big shift in how they were wanting their workforce to shift. Similarly, other businesses, I'm sure banking, with the emergence of fintech, people started saying, how do we change my front office processes? How do we change my customer engagement processes? So you started seeing a second trend, and that became like a big event or a big area to make changes. That brought a second phase, which what I could typically call is a guided learning path, where you would pick a certain set of key big ticket areas, and then you push a program, digital or otherwise, and make people go through that. And what would we typically measure? We would typically measure things like how many certifications did we complete, right? How many people do I have as a tech company? When I spent about 30 years in that, we would measure, okay, mere paas AWS ke kitne certified people hai, right? Or probably in a banking company, we can probably look at, okay, how many people have gone through the digital customer experience engagement program, right, that they have created. So you would work a lot more around program outcomes and certification. That was the second phase that we saw. The current one, which probably is where I feel, and I take this cue from my experience in marketing, is to focus on that individual learner. If you see, these were not really very learner focused. They were really focused on running a program and making a set of initiatives. But the third one is the context of if the rate and pace of change is going to be so much, if the ownership is not going to be at the learner level, this change cannot be done at scale, right? Fundamentally, it has to drill down to that learner. And in order to do that, the skills first learning is probably the biggest big shift that we are seeing. Now, what does that require? That would require for you to be able to measure skill proficiency. So that's an area that work is going on. So that's, how do you measure skill? If you can't measure it, you just can't inspect it. If you can't inspect it, you don't know what the outcomes are. So that's the first, can you measure skills? So that's, in order to do that, do you know what should you measure, right? So that's where the role-based, capability-based part emergence is coming. People say, well, let's start defining roles. Let's start defining what are the key skills that are required for a particular role. And then you can say, what is the proficiency level? My company to his company, my function to that, another function, there are proficiencies to be done. So there is a lot of intelligence that is today available where you leverage data to be able to enabling a skills-first learning model. So I would say these are the three models. They coexist. It's not that they are mutually exclusive. You find all the three running at the same time. But one and the last that I spoke about is the one which is most learner-centric. It actually treats you, in the world of marketing, we say the marketing feels best when it feels like service. In the same way, learning is most impactful when it feels that I need to do it and it's an imperative for me, right? So how do you make that more learner-driven, learner experience-driven is where the skills-first learning is transforming into.
Thank you, Dallas. TK, I'd like to ask you, since the pandemic, learning and skill building programs have become a priority for all leaders. So please share a few talent-centric strategies that have worked for you to fuel business transformation and plug the skill gap.
Yeah, so I guess, learning, there's a lot of, discussion on, as Dallas was saying, on the importance of learning. I guess today, it's cliche, but the fact is that the point I was trying to say that you have to have learning which is part of your daily life. I mean, you can't not have learning as part of your daily life because you as an individual will not be able to survive those changes that, the other panelists have highlighted. And as corporations, you will not be able to succeed. So a couple of things at ICICI that, we've looked at. One, we have from the very beginning have not looked at talent or supply in a very narrow sense of skills. We have largely focused on the attitude of people. We hire on that basis. However, we believe that the rest of the skills can certainly be trained. So very early, in the early 2000s, we invested in a very robust learning and development platform because we believe that that is the core for any corporation to survive all the changes that we spoke about. What it did also is to really increase the funnel of talent for us. So unlike most corporations where normally you would have looked at skills from within the sector, which often increases your cost of acquisition, and often you don't get the right set of people to serve you, we really increased the funnel of supply, where we could hire people across FMCG, consumer durables, IT, pharma, any sector, and get them. And we had such a strong learning and development platform that we were confident that we could convert them into bankers. We also invested very early in our supply side because talent for a growing corporation has to come from the marketplace. And in the marketplace, you really didn't have a ready supply of talent from the industry or universities, which gave you banking skills. So we invested in really tying up with extremely reputed academic partners in really pre-training a lot of our employees into the corporation. So I guess a whole lot of work happens around building a very robust learning and development platform and also solving these talent problems for yourself. The third and the most important point of learning is, I think the flavor of learning almost leads us to a classroom, or maybe today in the digital world, it's about the e-learning and other more interfaces that we have. But a lot of learning also happens on the job. So at ICICI, in addition to the fact that we built the supply side, we have a pretty robust learning and development platform. We've also provided learning opportunities by giving jobs to people ahead of time. We rotate people across various functions. So in some sense, we have created a platform of learning. For example, I was talking to, the former Indian hockey captain, Viren Raskina, and he mentioned that today the game of hockey, and many of us, in the hall may connect, many of us may not, but a game of hockey has completely transformed itself. The rules of the game have completely changed, right? The game is 1 hour today, and you have multiple substitutions available. And I was appalled at the number of substitutions that today happen in a hockey match. You have 80 to 90 substitutions that happen in a hockey match in a game of 1 hour, right? And to me, that talks about how a corporation should really look at. Because today you're talking about, 11 players except the goalkeeper, the 10 of them playing different roles at different points of time, and yet in a very orchestrated manner. So, look at the learning that happens by putting a defender into a job of a midfielder to that of a forward. But all these roles are interchangeable, and 80 substitutions happen, and they seamlessly get into that network, and they're able to and manage that combination depending on the situation of the game. So to me, corporations also have to be flexible enough where talent can be moved across different functions, different roles, and seamlessly move them in a manner to, resolve a certain challenge that you're looking at in the corporation. And that often requires a whole lot of cultural appetite within the corporation and ability to take risks. So I was just telling Dallas and Manpreet on the sidelines that I have a colleague of mine in HR who, after having served in the HR function for over 20 plus years, has been moved as the head of our services and NBFC function, which is a core banking job. Other colleague of mine today heads the government banking business, again from the HR function. Now, unheard of, right? Now, and it's not that this person has done any business before, but to really place bets on people, right? And take those chances with them and give those opportunities, I think is going to be another huge learning opportunity for people, which often gets underlooked in corporations. Thank you.
So our time's up, but I just want to take 1 or 2 points from you on the point that even with the best learning intent and initiative, sometimes it lacks to give us a tangible business outcome. So 1 or 2 points on that. Manpreet.
Can I just, so, again, a challenging point. I think learning cannot have we are learning leaders and we go back and set goals for learning. And that itself is where the pitfall comes in. Learning can't have a goal. A learner can have a goal. A business can have a goal. And if that's the frame with which we start setting the learning organization, where it's, learning organizations are busy with, like I say, it's not about content, it's about context. And when the learning leaders bring that context, the last mile for the people, for the business, outcomes will get delivered. So think of it this way. If your sales guy is going out for $1 million deal to meet a CEO, in the middle of that, adrenaline, if there is this 3-minute bite that a learning organization can create, that can help create that deal, learning is really working. But we are far away from that world today, because learning is right now a separate department, and that separate department has its own goals, and therefore we get sort of vitiated away from the business and the organizational context.
I think we'll take 1 or 2 audience questions now. Yes. And the mic there.
Hi. Pleasure listening to all of you. My question is to Mr. TK. You spoke about humility in the organization, that organizations need to be, in current era, more humble. There should be humility. But we, people coming from the past generation, I'll call myself, not from this generation, but from past generation, we have this habit of, that we have to work with discipline, we have to work our time and all. But the current generation, what we see now, and post this pandemic, they talk about, there is a pajama culture, that I will wake up, I'll open my laptop and I'll start working. I'll work from home. I don't want to work from office, as long as I'm completing my targets. There are people who will come and say that, why are you talking about moonlighting? It's on me, I'm completing your work. But and many people like me here think that, it doesn't work. At the end of the day, discipline is, and as Rahul Bose said, that, there is no alternative of hard work. So what do you think about, being CHRO? What do you think about this moonlighting, work from home, and other things? Should we be more humble about this?
So you want me to get in trouble, right? So no, I can only address it from the perspective of my corporation. I think you have 2 separate questions in it, but I hear your final question. Humility is different from what you mentioned, but that said, it also depends on corporation to corporation. That luxury of working from home or working from anywhere is not necessarily available in a banking services organization like ours. Ours is essential services, and through the lockdown, on I think March 22nd is when we had the lockdown 2021. Through 2021 till today, none of the branches at ICICI Bank could shut down, right? We had to have our employees going to branch. We had to have them working because customers need to be served. So we really don't have the luxury. And in our corporation, I can only talk about ICICI. I can't talk about the rest of the world. We have very clearly upfront, clarified to our employees that we are part of essential services. Like if you're working for a hospital, you don't have the luxury of sitting at home and working from home. If you're working for the Indian Army, you can't do work from home, right? So I guess each corporation, each industry will have to resolve for itself. So I can only talk about ICICI. So we have to be very clear. The rest of what you're saying is, I guess, something that is happening around us. And as we all spoke, those are changes happening, and you have to be cognizant of it, and you'll have to respond to it. And each of us will respond to it in a different manner. But the humility to accept that the current generation is going to think different, and hence we need to maybe adopt and adapt ourselves differently, is something you can't say that this is how it shall be because I think it's how it is. The world around has changed. So I think corporations will be, in their own nuanced way, will be responding to the situation. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. So the humility there comes in to say that it's happening, so you and I are not going to stop it, right? Because it's happening. In fact, I keep saying that the way I'm sure many of us would have done that. You walk into a class today, I have all the sympathies for the class teacher today, right? In the past, I don't know in your school, but where I studied, Kendriya Vidyalaya, where I studied in my schooling, right? The teacher could throw you out of the class. I can't say this, I'm sure it's not going to go on record, but I've been caned by my principal many a times, right? And that was quite common, right? And it was acceptable. In fact, when you get caned and your parents are summoned to the school, be rest assured your parents will cane you once more for that, right? So it was double. But today, none of it is possible. Today, I have my TT coach for my son who says that if I were to even ask and raise my voice with the child, right, the child goes home and the parent then steps in, and then I'll have to manage it because the child may drop off the coaching. So he says the current one of the players who's in the Commonwealth Games, I won't name him, but he's currently represented India and they won gold. He's one of the students. He used to get picked up at 5 because at 10 o'clock in the night, when the person did not give the backhand shot as well, it was to rankle the coach. The coach used to get up in the morning at 5, go to his house, wake up the child, take him to the table and make him practice that stroke until he became perfect. And the parents were very supportive. Today, it's not possible. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, right? Because the child also expresses his or her desire to figure out how it has to train. So the coach cannot deploy those methods that he deployed for a generation and got winners. So he told me, he said, sir, I have to morph now because the current expectation is very different. So I think acknowledgement and humility and willing to respond to it. And I'm not saying these kids won't perform any better, but you'll have to probably looking at training them differently than going at 5 o'clock in the morning and pulling the child out. That's not going to work today. That's the only limited point.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we have to leave the stage. We've taken more time. This is just a precursor. We can have a lot more discussions off the stage, and that's what the residential event is all about, to discuss these kind of issues off the stage. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, viewers, and do enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.